بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إذا وقعت الواقعة ليس لوقعتها كاذبة خافضة رافعة. إذا رجت الأرض رجا وبست الجبال بسا فكانت هباء منبثا وكنتم أزواجا ثلاثة فأصحاب الميمنة ما أصحاب الميمنة وأصحاب المشأمة ما أصحاب المشأمة والسابقون السابقون أولئك المقربون في جنات النعيم. ثلة من الأولين وقليل من الآخرين على سرر موضونة متكئين عليها متقابلين. يطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون بأكواب وأباريق وكأس من معين لا يصدعون عنها ولا ينزفون. وفاكهة مما يتخيرون ولحم طير مما يشتهون وحور عين كأمثال اللؤلؤ المكنون جزاء بما كانوا يعملون. لا يسمعون فيها لغوا ولا تأثيما إلا قيلا سلاما سلاما. وأصحاب اليمين ما أصحاب اليمين في سدر مخضود وطلح منضود وظل ممدود وماء مسكوب وفاكهة كثيرة لا مقطوعة ولا ممنوعة وفرش مرفوعة. إنا أنشأناهن إنشاء فجعلناهن أبكارا عربا أترابا لأصحاب اليمين. ثلة من الأولين وثلة من الآخرين. وأصحاب الشمال ما أصحاب الشمال في سموم وحميم وظل من يحموم لا بارد ولا كريم. إنهم كانوا قبل ذلك مترفين وكانوا يصرون على الحنث العظيم وكانوا يقولون أإذا متنا وكنا ترابا وعظاما أإنا لمبعوثون أوآباؤنا الأولون قل إن الأولين والآخرين لمجموعون إلى ميقات يوم معلوم ثم إنكم أيها الضالون المكذبون لآكلون من شجر من زقوم فمالئون منها البطون فشاربون عليه من الحميم فشاربون شرب الهيم هذا نزلهم يوم الدين نحن خلقناكم فلولا تصدقون أفرأيتم ما تمنون أأنتم تخلقونه أم نحن الخالقون نحن قدرنا بينكم الموت وما نحن بمسبوقين على أن نبدل أمثالكم وننشئكم فيما لا تعلمون ولقد علمتم النشأة الأولى فلولا تذكرون أفرأيتم ما تحرثون أأنتم تزرعونه أم نحن الزارعون لو نشاء لجعلناه حطاما فظلتم تفكهون إنا لمغرمون بل نحن محرومون أفرأيتم الماء الذي تشربون أأنتم أنزلتموه من المزن أم نحن المنزلون لو نشاء جعلناه أجاجا فلولا تشكرون أفرأيتم النار التي تورون أأنتم أنشأتم شجرتها أم نحن المنشئون نحن جعلناها تذكرة ومتاعا للمقوين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم فلا أقسم بمواقع النجوم وإنه لقسم لو تعلمون عظيم إنه لقرآن كريم في كتاب مكنون لا يمسه إلا المطهرون تنزيل من رب العالمين أفبهذا الحديث أنتم مدهنون وتجعلون رزقكم أنكم تكذبون فلولا إذا بلغت الحلقوم وأنتم حينئذ تنظرون ونحن أقرب إليه منكم ولكن لا تبصرون فلولا إن كنتم غير مدينين ترجعونها إن كنتم صادقين فأما إن كان من المقربين فروح وريحان وجنة نعيم وأما إن كان من أصحاب اليمين فسلام لك من أصحاب اليمين وأما إن كان من المكذبين الضالين فنزل من حميم وتصلية جحيم إن هذا لهو حق اليقين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone, my name is Ibtihal. Welcome to those of you who are here tonight in person, as well as those of you who are tuning in online. Just before we begin, I would like to point out that tonight's session is in the form of a Q&A. So if you have any questions and you're watching online, please do send them in through the YouTube chat. If you're here in person, you can just jump in anytime if you have questions. So just to introduce tonight's session and the event that we're hosting, obviously, in light of recent events, it's important for all of us to take steps in understanding and first and foremost educating ourselves more on the issue of racism as well as the issues surrounding racism. So tonight we're hoping to open up a discussion on how the historical context of discrimination has led us to where we are today from an Islamic historical perspective as well as from an American historical perspective. And with us tonight we have Sheikh Mujtaba Khaliq and Dr. Isa Muhammad, who will be sharing their perspectives on those two topics respectively. So just to introduce our speakers really quickly tonight, Dr. Muhammad is a scholar of race, ethnicity, religion, and constitutional and legal history, and he's held tenured positions at the University of Illinois and the University of Central Florida. He's also lectured internationally and appeared on several media programs, including the BBC, Al Jazeera, the History Channel, and the Discovery Network. He's also an active public figure, as well as a humanitarian activist, focusing on human rights and environmental issues. He's held White House Commission positions and served various state governors. He also performs Islamic services in correctional institutions throughout the state and enjoys projects with holistic goals. As an advocate for justice, Dr. Muhammad has also addressed United Nations assemblies across the globe. And the main thesis of Dr. Muhammad's work stands on the pillar of social engineering, which I'll let him elaborate on more as we get into tonight's discussion. Sheikh Mujtaba, born into a family of scholars, he started studying Islamic studies from a very early age. He then went to the city of Qum to further his religious studies and meet and benefit from great teachers and scholars. After that, he traveled to Australia, where he obtained his bachelor's and postgraduate degrees in business, computing, and psychology. While in Australia, he also taught Islamic studies, jurisprudence, Arabic, Quran, and theology. After that, he moved to Canada to serve as the resident scholar for two communities in Vancouver. In 2014, he was invited by the Tampa Bay community here in Florida and has been serving them since then. And since 2017, he's also been serving the Orlando and Sanford communities here. So, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you both for being here tonight. I'd like to start off just by inviting them both to share a short introduction to what they'll be speaking about tonight. So we can start off with Sheikh Mujtaba.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. A'udhu billahi min ash-shaytanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala sayyidina wa nabiyyina Muhammadin wa alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. مؤمنين ومؤمنات, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for hosting this great discussion. Inshallah, we'll benefit from one another and from the discussions that are raised. I want to very briefly shed some light on the surah that I recited, which we often re-recite, and it's very recommended, Surah Al-Asr, which is in line with this discussion, in fact, on racism or many other types of human errors, I would call them, the errors within human society and humanity. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, swearing by Asr, Innal insana lafi khusr. Insan by nature is in loss. If insan is left to his nature, he is in loss. By nature we have these tendencies of possessiveness, of anger, of rage, of racism, of racial discrimination, or other types of discrimination. All of these things we have within us as part of our nature, and we have to purify from them and ascend above our physical existence. We have the physical part in us and we have the spiritual part. We have the body and we have the ruh. If we allow the body to be in control, our body has certain characteristics and we identify ourselves with certain borders or characteristics, and therefore we try and create borders. We are in loss unless we believe, amanu, and we do the good deeds. Here I want to focus on the state of mind and the heart, believe, and the action. And then also, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. When we speak of racism, we're speaking of an issue that in fact, or any kind of discrimination, any kind of injustice. This is injustice. Racism is essentially oppression. It is unjust behavior. Any kind of injustice, discrimination, racism, all of those things are in fact the opposite of what religion came for. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in ayah 25 of Surah Al-Hadid, chapter 57, He says, we send messengers, we send books, all of the revelations, all of these things happened. Why? لِيَقُومَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ, so that people can establish justice. If we cannot establish justice in terms of people who simply look different to us, they're not of any other religion, they may not be. That is another kind of discrimination. Religious discrimination is another category. We have even gender discrimination. If, as humans, if we cannot establish justice with other humans just based on the fact that they look different, we have not understood the reason of revelation and the reason of religions. That is one. Secondly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribed worshipping. Religious communities, and we're speaking within religious communities. Religious communities, they understand religion as prayers and fasting or other types of worshipping, whether it be Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever it may be, they identify religion as that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is needless. He has no need for our worshipping. Why is it there? He says, وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ لِذِكْرِ, remembrance. Remembrance so that, he says, remembrance so that you gain in أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ, so that you can gain peace, tranquility, peace within, qulub. When you have peace within, you emit peace. If you have peace, you can give it. The purpose of salat is to obtain peace, or dhikr. Dhikr brings peace. It is a requirement of people of paradise, or those who want and hope to be admitted to paradise, to have to achieve that peace. If we do not achieve that peace, we are not admitted to paradise. People with ill feelings, in other words, people who are racist, people who discriminate against others, whatever they may be, they will not be admitted to paradise. This is a reality that we're dealing with. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it in the Holy Quran. The Prophet elaborates on it in his ahadith. I want to share a couple of ahadith. Again, I want to keep it very brief, inshallah, so we can hear from Dr. White, my dear friend. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, whoever has a tiny bit of chauvinism or zealotry, whoever has that, man ta'assaba, faqad khala'a ribqa al-iman, he has taken off the, basically around our neck, if we are faithful people, it is, the parable to that is to wear a necklace of faith. Basically, that is your identity. You have taken it off. Basically, you ripped it. Khala is you ripped it off. You ripped it and threw it away. Why? Those who have that kind of attitude, chauvinism towards others, racism is one of it. You've taken off faith completely. Immediately you have taken that off. In another hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he also says, "Man kana fi qalbihi habbatun." If you have a tiny bit of asabiyya, Quran describes that as hamiyya, hamiyyat al-jahiliyya. Hamiyya refers to zealotry, refers to vanity, to have vanity in you, to think that we are better than others. Whoever has a tiny bit of that, then the Prophet says, بَعَثَهُ اللَّهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ مَعَ أَعْرَابِ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. On the day of judgment, he would be raised with the people of ignorance. In Quran, this kind of attitude, racism, chauvinism, discrimination, thinking that you're better than others for any reason besides taqwa, which is only identified and determined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that kind of attitude in the Quran is described as jahiliyyah. In other words, you have gone before Islam. You have not even submitted to Islam. So one who has that kind of attitude, and this is why it is dangerous to stay in that state. To stay in a state of racism, to stay in a state of chauvinism, it is dangerous because it is pre-Islamic. It is pre-Islamic in the sense that the pre-Islamic society had it. Muslims cannot have it. By nature, Muslims have to immediately eradicate any kind of chauvinism and racism. Now we come to one positive type of basically what the hadith calls asabiyya. If you want to have if you want to get basically have zealotry, if you want to get angry about something, Imam Amirul Mu'mineen salawatullah wa salamu alayhi says, do not allow anyone to fool you using, he says, I never seen anyone using jahiliyyah except to mobilize the foolish amongst the masses. Basically using the racial differences or any other differences in order to mobilize the foolish. He says, do not allow that to happen. Instead, if you want to have asabiyya, have it for makarim al-akhlaq, the great attributes. You want to have it for the sake of establishing justice. Have it when you see someone unjust, be angry with it. Have it with great attributes and characteristics. This is the only time that one is allowed to have this kind of zealotry. Otherwise, any other type, wal-'ayadu billah, will lead one to destruction. We seek refuge to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from that. Inshallah, I'll hear from...
Thank you, Sheikh Mustafa. You already, I think, answered maybe my first two questions, so thank you very much. Dr. Muhammad, if we could hear just a brief introduction to your main topic today.
Thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
I want to thank the staff of Hayy, and in particularly Sister Ibtaha, Sister Manaz, Brother Abbas, and of course the Sheikh, in putting this very, very important and fine discussion together, something that is meaningful and important for our survival. Not just a survival as Muslims, but a survival as a people on this globe. Sister asked me about social engineering. Briefly, there was a great scholar, the father of the civil rights litigation movement. His name was Charles Houston, and he was the one who taught Thurgood Marshall. And Thurgood Marshall, as you know, is the one who brought forth Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 that outlawed segregation within this country. But Charles Houston was the architect of that. And he stated that an advocate, a lawyer, a scholar, a cleric, people of substance, they either are social engineers or they're parasites on society. And that really means is that we have to utilize our skills, our knowledge, our intellect to make society better. If we're not making it better, we're nothing more than parasites feeding on society. So social engineering is making people, making society a greater place so that we can live in a more peaceful and harmonic community that we all strive for. Now, to understand race relations between African Americans and the larger white community, one must review the American racial historical patterns since the Civil War. Now, this transitional period after the Civil War is typically called Reconstruction. During Reconstruction, the United States developed and authored the three most important amendments on race relationship. They were one, the 13th Amendment that outlawed slavery, the 14th Amendment that made the former slaves citizens or gave them due process, and the 15th Amendment was one that gave African American men the right to vote. Sorry, sisters, voting for sisters did not come into the 1920s. Now, after this honeymoon period, which was from 1863 to 1877, southern and northern states enacted legal and extra-legal measures that were designed to negate, polarize, isolate, and subjugate African Americans to the whims of white domination and exploitation. The patterns of control that we saw at this time would be seen in the social, the political, the economic, and the judicial patterns of American society within those systems that would subjugate the African American within that fold. Now, in a very interesting manner, that while African Americans would be subjugated by these legal and extra-legal, and note, extra-legal only means organizations like the KKK and the Night Riders would extend their policies to keep people in place, extend their policies to enact intimidation and terror so that people will not even think about leaving their place of control, of inferiority. So while this was going on, the larger community kept up this premise. And that premise was that if you wanted to succeed in the United States without regard to race or color, you had to do what? One, work hard work. Two, have thrift, save your money. Three, love God and your nation. Four, be peaceful and loving. These were the successful elements of American society. Many of them that many of us still practice. However, and also leaders like Booker T. Washington, which was one of the great leaders of the late 19th century and early 20th century, one of the greatest leaders, one of the greatest African American leaders in America. He was the architect of the Tuskegee Institute, one of the great schools of this country, preached this to African Americans. So by the turn of the century, millions of African Americans was following this course. But there was a problem. All right? What was the problem? That is, when they were practicing this course, they were discriminated against. Now, this course is, we call today conservatism, hard work, thrift, love of country, love of God, etc. But when blacks fell into this element, they were discriminated against. They were taught that they were told that they were too uppity. They were told that they were too aggressive. They were told that they were too arrogant. The point is that you can be good, but don't be too good. You can be assertive, but don't be too assertive. You can be forthright, but don't be too forthright. So what happened? Now, the arm of the state became law enforcement. The arm of the state began to practice a policy to keep these people in their place. We call it today what? Law and order. Keeping them in their place. All right? Don't get out of that place. Now, keeping them in their place took on another term. And that term was Jim Crow. All right? Jim Crow were laws that was geared and directed towards the underclassed, to keep them in a system of servitude, to keep them in a system of inferiority, to keep them isolated from the economic fruits, from the educational fruits, and from the social fruits of American society. So in order for us to understand the concept of race in the United States, especially us who are Muslims, and especially us who are new immigrants to the society, we have to understand the struggle of African Americans fighting for human rights and dignity. If you don't understand that, then you will misread the whole story and take on the narrative of people who did not want real equality. Thank you. We'll take some questions.
Thank you very much. If anyone does have any questions based on that, whether online or in person, feel free to jump in, put them on the chat, raise your hand. Just to start us off, though, okay, we do have a question.
Dr. White, how did Muslims in America resist white supremacy?
Well, it's so interesting to note that during the slave period, the group of people that Europeans did not want to bring to the Americas were Muslims. We make a mistake by believing that they just had a big net and they went into Africa and grabbed everybody. They were selective. By mistake, they brought Muslims because Muslims had a history of what? Rebelling against oppression. Anywhere to fight against oppression. And that's what occurred. Now, who were some of the Muslims and some of the uprisings that took place? I'll give you a list of them. All right? 1741, the New York conspiracy was led by two Muslims by the name of Kofi and Kwaka, all right, who fought against the bigotry, the white exploitation, the white supremacy in New York. This was during after the colonial period, all right? 1752, in Haiti, on the island of Hispaniola, another Muslim by the name of Macandao fought. He said that our people are not designed to be enslaved. This is not what Allah wanted. All right? A third one, there's a woman by the name of Nani in 1728. She was an Ashanti Muslim, all right, from the Gold Coast. And she led the Maroon Wars in Jamaica that fought constantly against oppression, that ultimately forced the English crown to make concessions. In 1811, in Louisiana, over 500 Muslims rebelled in something called the German Coast Uprising. 1835, Muslims revolted in the Bahia, Salvador, Brazil. All right, taking down the whole slave system there. And if you want to go back to the United States, I'm sure many of us have read the book, Roots, or at least saw the movie. How many of you have seen the movie, Roots? I did. If you know what, put up your hands. And I'm sure the thousands who are listening and watching us have seen the movie too. And the main character in the movie was whom? What's his name? Kunta Kinte. And Kunta Kinte was whom? An African Muslim. And they kept on saying, whipping him, your name is Toby, your name is Toby. Even though he took on the name Toby, in his heart was Islam. And he resisted Islam. He resisted slavery, and this was carried on throughout the Americas. So therefore, Muslims, from day one, have always resisted oppression in this society we call the Americas, right up until today in the African-American Muslims that developed in the 1910s and 1920s.
Thank you very much for that answer, Dr. Muhammad. I didn't know about many of those, so it's good to be learning something new. Sheikh Mustafa, you did answer this already somewhat in your introduction in terms of Islam's stance on racial equality and what Islam has to say about relationships between races, but just focusing on the historical aspect, are there any examples from Islamic history where we can see racial challenges or anything we can see playing out throughout history?
Very good, Sanford. So from very early on in the history of Islam, in fact, Islamic society and the example of the early history of Islam would give a lot of wealth to the modern society, because what they're dealing with today in America, or in the last couple of centuries, and what Dr. Watt is mentioning, they dealt with back then. They were in an integrated society already, much more than what we have here, in fact, especially because of the proximity. They were right next to Africa, so they had a lot of Africans there. They were close to Persia, they had Persians there, they had the Romans there. So they were integrated in the society. And as soon as the Prophet ﷺ was appointed and started preaching, he had people from all these races around him. And immediately there was basically the fight back against him. Part of the reason why his own family members, who were amongst the elite of Quraysh, were actually resenting him was the fact that he was saying, we are equal. They are saying, no, we're not equal. Again, we're here, you call it white supremacy. They had the exact same thing back then, that they thought we are superior. All of these people are beneath us. The number one thing that they used against nations was actually the education. In some nations, they did not allow education for the lower classes of the society. In Arabia, they considered their literacy, and they were the most literate in terms of linguistics, and that was a big thing that they had. They considered that as the top, and they looked at everybody else as beneath them. That's how they looked at them. The Prophet ﷺ immediately came to say, no, none of that exists. All of these people are equal. In fact, he says in one narration, he says, being an Arab is not your father or your mother. It's a language. You learn it, therefore you're it. Basically, لَيْسَتِ الْعَرَبِيَّةُ بِأَبٍ وَلَا بِأُمٍ. In other words, don't make it into a racial thing that has to do with the color or has to do with the lineage. Okay, where are your roots from? I was watching a short video. You know, somebody looks Asian, so the person is asking them, where are you from? And she is saying, I'm from one city, one state here. And he keeps saying, no, where are you from? And he insists, you probably watched this. And in Islam, the Prophet from back then established this, that being an Arab is a language. You know the language, that's what you are. A language and a culture, you learn it, this is what you are. None of these things existed, and it is very famous, his will or his part of his words in his Hajjatul Wada. Part of it was the very famous statement that there is no difference between, or there's no priority for a white over a black, or a black over a white, or a red over, and again when we say this over that, because often mankind, if you don't purify, often what we do, as soon as we have an upper hand, we start becoming the racist, you know, one or the other. Islam from the beginning abolished those borders.
Thank you very much for that. And jumping off of that, looking at examples from Islamic history, Dr. Muhammad, can you perhaps shed some light on how those race relationships have carried forward into modern day USA. So how can we understand that? Obviously you touched on the transitional period after the Civil War and the amendments that came after that. But in terms of, you know, what went wrong after that, obviously they were steps in the right direction. And you mentioned, I know there's the clause in the 13th Amendment that actually was kind of a loophole. But if you can shed some more light on that, please.
First, we have to understand that racism is a power play. It's not just a case whereby a yellow doesn't like a person who is brown because of color, or a white doesn't like a person who is black because of color. That becomes the byproduct of this whole element. The element is about power and economics, you see, because they needed the economic and the labor after the Civil War for the country to continue, to be productive. I mean, we still, by the 19th century, we were still an agrarian country, all right? Then race becomes an element of an excuse. Now, there was something that the United States policies created during the early stages of its development, and that was something called just wars. J-U-S-T-T, just wars. And that means you can exploit people, you can enslave people, you can discriminate against people because they were heathens, they were barbaric, they were savage, thus they were outside the eyes of God. So therefore, they used this premise to carry on after the Civil War, going into the late 19th century, early 20th century. Now, by 1896, there was something called Plessy versus Ferguson, a law, a case that stated that America would be an apartheid country. And that is, it would be separated, whites and blacks, but it would be separate and unequal. Not separate and equal. Separate and unequal. Now, as this was developing, there are laws now that came in to justify this. Now, as this was developing, going back to the extra-legal activities of what group? The KKK, Ku Klux Klan, and the Night Riders, they became the extended arm and they began to intimidate. Put it this way, between 1900 to 1920, a black man, woman, or child was lynched every other day in this country. Now, some of us don't know what lynching is. Many of us think that lynching is just hanging someone. No, it's much more than that. It's a case whereby you pull the skin off of the person. It may be the case where you boil a person. It may be the case where you cut off their genitals if you're a man and force you to eat your own genitals. These are the type of barbaric issues that was taking place within the society. So it became a pattern of this. And it became a pattern of laws and activities. I'm going to give you an example of some of the people who were involved in this and who were members of the KKK and how to enact policies that subjugated people. All right? Some of them. Right now. How many of you have ever heard of a senator by the name of Robert Byrd? All right? He was a member of the KKK. All right? How about President Warren Harding? He was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Have you ever heard of President Harry Truman of the Fair Deal? A member of the KKK. How about Lyndon Baines Johnson, that we talk about so much about the civil rights agenda? He was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Now, where does it go? I'm jumping over a lot of things because I know there's a lot of things that Sister needs to talk about and get to. Now, the last thing I want to make mention of this, these people ultimately had a hand, again, in the element of the prison system. How is that? Well, after Reconstruction, 70% of the prisoners were African Americans. Today, What is it? Something like 42% of the prisoners in the United States are African Americans. All right? Now, let's go up a little bit farther. We'll see that since they were part of the prison system, they became associated with it. Right now, we have a number of senators, a number of congressmen who are invested in the prison system. They invest in it and they get money. Who are some of them? All right? Elizabeth Warren is one. Marco Rubio is another. Former Senator Bill Nelson received money. And the list goes on and on and go on. So therefore, when we talk about trying to eradicate this element of racism, we have to go to the root. It's like a cancer. We got to go to the root because right now, they really want us to talk superficially of it. So we talk, we have these nice conversations, and we pray, but we're not getting to the root. And the root is something that must be looked upon. Last thing, I'll give you a case. In the year 2011, there was a judge by the name of Carvella out of Pennsylvania, a judge. And what he did, he had a deal with several private jails in Pennsylvania to do what? To convict black youngsters to go to jail. And he was doing this 5, 6, 7 years. His sidebar, his kick was that if he did this, he would get $1 million. He was convicted for 28 years in 2011. He's not the only one. There's a whole pattern here. There's a whole element that we have to look at if we're really going to be true in eradicating this cancer that's within our society. And it's tough questions. And it's going to make all of us uneasy. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. I know we have a question from the audience, but just going off of that before I come to you. Sheikh Mujtaba, obviously, Dr. Muhammad just spoke about the issues with the policies from an economic perspective, a political, judicial perspective, as well as from like a civic perspective. So just based on that, what is Islam's stance or Islam's solution to the abolition of slavery, and how does that compare in terms of the amendments that they made and the changes that were made in the American system? How does that compare to what Islam's solution would say?
Very good, Ahsan. So one point that Dr. White mentioned is looking at the root of the problem. Islam looked at the root of the problem. The root, again, of the issue is in our own hearts, in our own selves, within ourselves. Each individual, we have to look within ourselves, and that is what Islam looked at and shed light on. Basically, everybody had to assess themselves and if they have this element of or this problem within themselves. Then the teachings of Islam came to work on kindness to these people, not just free these people. It is not about giving them a right of freedom. It was about recognizing them as a fellow human, a brother in humanity, and therefore, just like you are kind to your neighbor, just like you're kind to anyone in your community and society, you have to be kind to them. The change of state of mind was the root of the issue. Looking at them as equal humans, and then introducing the law. We have amendments that came after resistance, after fights, one after the other. In Islam, it was immediate. Some people, when they come to criticize Islam, why do you have laws about slavery? We have laws because from the day Islam took off, it was in a society that had slaves, and there were many slaves. And therefore, from day one, and Islam, we're speaking of a law, and Islamic law grew in how many years? In 23 years, realistically in the last 10 years, because the first 13 years was fight. In 10 years, all the laws that we have today in terms of Islamic law about everything, including these issues, were established already. So already the equality of these people was established. Already all of the great the lessons and teachings that Islam gave And this is what I want to finish with, the most important thing that Islam emphasized upon is education. Because often people looked at these people as savages and whatever, and they did to them, they were more savage with them. You know, what you're describing in terms of the lynching and whatever they did to them was worse than what they were describing of them. But Islam immediately came to say, hold on, before you free them, educate them. That was the number one thing, and this is the practice of Ahlul Bayt practically. Ahlul Bayt, they acquired them because they're members of the society. We don't want to throw them into the streets and then make a problem, a social problem. No. They taught people that you sit with them, you eat with them. The Prophet would sit with them. You know, this segregation abolished it from the beginning, from the very start of Islam. No segregation. You sit with them, you eat with them. They are with you, they are part of you. And then you educate them, and when it comes time that you want to free yourself from the hellfire, because the Quran says, فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ, you will not be free from the hellfire unless you free them. Okay, so you have to free them. Comes time that you free them with a gift. This is the practice that Islam taught so that they can establish themselves. This is a way different approach, which perhaps if the American society learns, though a little late, but better late than never, it'll be a big difference.
I want to drive in with that.
Yeah, we can have a brief comment. We do have a question waiting in the audience as well. Do you want to say something, Dr. Muhammad?
Yeah, this is for Dr. White. Do you feel the programs in this country, affirmative action, 1980, all the programs for women, Hispanic, African American, youths, today we see youths are dropping off high school, crimes are high. You feel that opportunities are out there in the United States and the minority groups, including women, Hispanic, and African Americans, are not taking advantage, while immigrants coming here, 50% of immigrants are starting new companies, technology companies. 50% are foreign born. So these Africans and Hispanic and women are not taking advantage. Do you feel that there is that issue that they're not taking full advantage of the system?
First of all, when we look at the element of affirmative action, we have to look at it historically and in two phases. One, we see elements of this that was called New Deal programs that came after World War II, or not World War II, but during the Great Depression, where you had, almost like now, 40–50% of the American workforce was unemployed. So the government enacted policies to get the people working again, to get them moving. Now here's the problem now. When the war was over, when the Depression ended, instead of taking those people away from that government assistance, they influenced those people to remain connected to the system. So therefore, their livelihood became the system. Food, bread, work, etc. Then within this whole element, they also encourage the breakup of the family, which you have in Black America, right? And how's that done? In order now for women to get assistance from the government to live, they had to say that their husbands or they didn't have a man. So the man is kicked out of the house. Now, what do you know? In order to have a strong home and a strong community, you need a man. You need a father figure. What does the father do? All right? He presents ideas. He helps the wife with discipline. He, as Muslims, we lead the family. But when you don't have that, it's broken up. Now, as that was taking place, there's another element come up, and that's in the affirmative action programs that was put together by Patrick Moynihan of New York, Senator Moynihan. And he stated that we have to have programs to help the African American community, set aside programs. And they really became quite interesting and quite strong. I would say African Americans did take advantage of them. And one thing is important, and this cannot be overstated. The immigrant community must understand that their rise to greatness in America is really on the backs of the struggle of the African American. Because it was him who fought. He was in the streets. He was being butchered by people like Bill Connor out of Alabama who had dogs on them. He was being killed by the KKK. He was being isolated. So every minority group in the United States that has risen to the top like cream have to give their respect to the African American because they're the ones who struggled. And they're the ones who paid the price. I remember a couple of years ago, and I was in Toronto at a conference, a Muslim conference, and someone said, oh, well, the Muslims now, we talk about the Arab Muslims, will say that, oh, they're the new blacks. Well, that's not true. By no means. Because you haven't taken the brunt of the hit like these other people. You can say you have discrimination, of course, but you're not the new black. And you don't want to be the new black. That's nothing to be proud of, unless you're willing to take the hits of that and take the brunt. So I would argue that African Americans have taken the opportunity. But here's the problem, Mr. Muhammad, and that is there's always another caveat that they put on you. They say, well, if you dress better, you will be elevated. So, blacks dress better. If you don't use Ebonics or Spanglish, just use the proper English, you do better. You rise up. What do you do? Some of the greatest speakers in this country are people of African descent. Oh, if you say sir and no ma'am to officers and policemen and others, you will be fine. You do that. Brutality doesn't stop. If you get a good education, you will achieve. Well, we see the evidence now that education always don't build wealth. And we see that a number of educated men and women who are black in this country, with PhDs, MDs, and so forth, they don't have the wealth, and they don't even surface at the same level as too many white Americans who just have a high school degree. So you see what takes place now is pent up emotion, asking, when is our time? When is it going to be a fair system? And now there's a new question that's being asked by many people. One last thing. And what is that question? What does justice look like? We talk about it, but we haven't gotten there because we're utilizing the old school of justice, which doesn't work.
Thank you for that answer. I hope that answered your question. I know I've read a lot recently as well about the model minority, when people say that immigrants coming to this country have managed to reach high levels, but forgetting the fact that, like you mentioned, the African Americans in this country have been through years of injustice and discrimination. So can some affirmative action really actually help that? The immigrants, many of them came into this country on the basis of deals that invited them in for economic and educational reasons. So that was a completely different background to the African Americans.
We have to, as Muslims, regardless if we're from immigrants or not, we have to confront the racism here. We have to look at ourselves, right?
Absolutely.
All right, and once we begin to look at us, I mean, some of us who attend masjids all over the city, and we have over 50 masjids in Central Florida, at least, and we're afraid to go into the inner city. Some of us don't even want to pray with Muslims of African descent. I went to one masjid, and it was in the inner city, and I was making salat, and a man in front of me had a gun in the spine of his back. So when he prostrated, I saw the gun. The gun was not there to protect him from whites or from other Muslims. It was there to protect him, what he thinks, from African American Muslims and African Americans. All right? Sheikh, you have to forgive me, but it messed up my whole prayer.
Yeah, no, I understand. I want to go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say we're actually out of time, but if you have some final words on what we can do as Muslims,
yes,
like Dr. Muhammad said, it has to come from an individual
the heart.
standpoint.
I started with Surah Al-Asr, and I want to finish with the same before, and I just want to share a brief story from the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi afdal salawat wa tahiyyat, when he was the best student of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. At his time, he was walking with some of his people, and he saw someone begging on the streets. He asked them, why is there a beggar during his khilafah? And they said, he is not a Muslim. Their response was, he's not a Muslim. And immediately he was angry. He was very angry with them. And this is where we say hamiyya or asabiyya for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was angered by a wrong act. He says, regardless of what he is, he served the community, the society, he worked, he is like you. Therefore, you see, in fact, during that time, he heard of a lady in another city who was non-Arab. And again, the racism back then, or minorities, were the non-Arabs. It was Arabs versus non-Arabs. And he was looking at non-Arabs, non-Muslims as equal people. That has to be in the heart. Islam teaches us, Surah Al-Asr tell us, Iman and Amal. Iman is the state of the heart. It has to be fixed inside. If in my heart I have racism, there's a problem within me. If my action displays racism, because Amal has to be good. And then one thing that we have to all keep in mind as Muslims is that just because I have a good heart, or just because I don't discriminate, I haven't done enough. Because the next part of the surah says, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. They remind one another. We have a responsibility to do what we're doing, inshallah, today, raising awareness and reminding one another of to purify the hearts, which inshallah, essentially it will purify the society that we're living in, inshallah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you, and it is approaching Maghrib time right now, so we will have to break here. But thank you for everyone here today, and thank you for those of you watching online as well. Inshallah, we can continue to improve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
Take a picture. No. All of us. You did? Okay.
Thank you very much, Hassan.
This is nice. This is a beginning. It's good. You see,